Welcome to Becoming Parents podcast. I'm your host, Jen Taylor Campbell. I'm a birth and bereavement doula, as well as an adoption and surrogacy doula. Doula means woman who serves. And although I love happy births, adoptions, and surrogacy, the pro bono part of my business is in bereavement. I'm here to help you. I'm also mom of 18 children, with over 30 years experience in the trenches as a mom myself. We have a huge blended family, and I've also experienced the loss of our adult son. Remember, give a shout out to those brave enough to share their stories on how they have become parents. Let's dive in. Welcome to Becoming Parents podcast. This is a really fun, interesting conversation that we're going to have with Traci Keen today. I'm very excited about it. Traci, how are you?
Doing well. How are you, Jen?
I'm fantastic. This is my favorite. So this is great. I want to start because we have the title here, the Mate Infertility's Inclusion First Approach with LGBTQ and Single Parent Infertility is the title of this podcast. So because of that, usually it's like, oh, if you're an entrepreneur, what do you do at the end? But I actually would just want to jump in right there. You're the CEO of Mate Fertility. And I thought it was going to be Australian because of the word mate, but it's not. You have several locations here. So just tell me a little bit about being the CEO there, and then I want to jump right into your story.
Yeah, I came into Mate just after they had opened their first clinic as the CEO. And a big part of what we're trying to do is really roll out a standardized methodology for practitioners to start opening new clinics. We train them, we look at the area they're in, and we are just really trying to increase the access points geographically throughout the United States, which, you know, we always hear about the financial factor, which is a huge factor, but we also don't talk enough about geography. Given that 85% of clinics are concentrated in primary markets, that's leaving a pretty vast amount of the population with
Just go ahead.
Yeah, it leaves a vast amount of the population without geographic access to care. And that's really the primary crux of our model, is creating more clinics and more providers to decrease the delta between the lack of access that exists, which, just to quantify it a little bit, I'm a numbers person. Last year in the US, we did 300,000 IVF cycles just to meet demand. We would have needed to do 3 million cycles.
So oh my gosh.
We're not even scratching the surface of meeting current demand. And as we know, for many, many factors, infertility, or other factors like delayed onset of parenting, single parenting, like, people just don't have access to the care they need, and it's reflected in that huge delta. And there are a lot of reasons that we can double click on within that number that I think are important.
Awesome. And I know in the information I have in the show notes, like, for the most part, infertility is available for Caucasians of higher income. And so that's part of the delta.
Yeah, a big part of the delta is that historically, and I choose to believe that none of this was intentional, right? I choose to believe that back in the late 70s, early 80s, when these programs were coming about, it was really, well-intended and well-meaning that they concentrated the clinics where they did because it was expensive, it was a new procedure, et cetera. But what happened over the past 40 plus years is that nothing changed within the system to create more access. So going back to your question, the original batch of clinics was really concentrated in high net worth areas in primary cities, big cities. And they kind of have stayed along the same trajectories, which is a little bit different than our model. But, it's not just Caucasian wealthy people, it's also heterosexual people, it's a very narrow demographic, historically speaking.
Married heterosexual Caucasians with money and it makes sense that was the target audience in the 70s. That makes sense. But it hasn't changed.
Yeah, and it hasn't changed. There was really not enough adaptation to the increasing demand. And then back to that number that I presented, like, it's huge now. In an average Mate fertility clinic, let's say top will do 500 cycles a year in an average mate fertility clinic. So even if we were to open 300 clinics and do 500 cycles, we're only adding 150,000 cycles to that 300,000 number. So when people want to talk about how big is the demand and, you know, who are your competitors and this and that, it's like, it kind of doesn't matter. We need to increase these absolute numbers so that we can also hedge for some policy change around mandated coverage. And I think, you know, having mentioned that you're from Massachusetts, Massachusetts is a mandated state, and we see double-digit IVF rates in that state in particular. So that's a bit of a guiding light to say that if we can leverage increasing the volume to get some more mandated coverage throughout the United States from insurance companies for these things, it's going to be a game changer, I think, for the people who are really wanting and needing access to this care.
And I told you before, like when we were pre-gaming, I went through infertility, and I am the heterosexual Caucasian. The reason that I could afford it was because we were Air Force. And so the insurance was incredible. Otherwise, there's no chance. And I could have gone the IVF route. I did the 7 surgeries, maxed out on medication, almost a year. And when IVF came up, I was like, this isn't my journey. And I decided, I did get pregnant off the cycle. The doctor was like, I don't know how this happened. And I remember saying, it might not be in your book. Like, sometimes it just doesn't make sense. And fertility does not make sense. So I give a huge kudos to the people that want to go the IVF route, because like that was not me. I ended up doing foster care instead, figuring I would adopt. I knew I had a high risk of miscarriage. I got pregnant 7 times total and lost 3. And I think that's why my miscarriages were a little easier emotionally, because I had this expectation of not being able to get pregnant or carry a pregnancy. But you're dealing with, like, once infertility is brought up, there's also the emotional factor. There's the, like, if you can get past the money, if you can get into a clinic, if you qualify for that and you figure out how to pay for it, there's so many more battles. It doesn't end there, right? There's so much more.
Right.
So
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
1 in 8 is the statistic I have, that when I'm speaking, 1 in 8 couples experience infertility. So please jump in.
Yeah, I mean, what you were saying about it doesn't end once you realize, or once you know, have saved, or once you find out that your employer has benefits that will cover it. And we should definitely talk about employer benefits. That's a huge increasing trend among you know, different areas, and worker retention, etc. Because regular insurance isn't covering this.
Yeah.
But you know, once you get to the point where you're like, okay, let's just use an example. I have a friend who's 36 years old, single, LGBTQ community, decided, you know what? I know I want to have kids. I'm not partnered right now. I should go ahead and do this, right? So you get over that initial hurdle of things, and then you get there. And it's a confusing process. It's a long process. It's a disjointed process, especially if you're dealing with donor sperm or any other type of donor tissue. Most of the consents are written geared towards heterosexual married people. So there's a bit of that, you know, again, it's some of it's not meant to be offensive, but a lot of the language used, a lot of the verbiage, and just the very medical forms themselves,
yeah,
kind of shame you for where you are in your life. You know, you're potentially, and it's a difficult enough journey already. So like a really big part of what we try to do is we try to create an approachable environment, an open environment. We spend a lot of time with patients before they even go to the office to make sure that they understand what this is going to look like. They understand how much it's going to cost. They understand everything about the journey before they set foot in the clinic. Because the last thing you want to do is have somebody just going through something that's already so challenging, as you mentioned, have no idea, no compass really to understand. And our model is really built to accommodate the patient journey and also facilitate providing, you know, top of class service from our providers. So we have points along the journey where patients aren't having to go into the office. They're talking to people remotely. So we have a very adaptive model because we know this is a long process. A lot
Right.
of people, it doesn't just take one try. I mean, we also have to look at the statistics and say, there's a lot of times that people aren't successful, right? So even they go through the process, the national clinical pregnancy average from IVF's 33%.
Oh,
That's not that high.
wow. I was going to ask you that. I didn't realize, I had no idea what it was. When like there's a low percentage, that doesn't mean anything to me. Like low percentage, what does that mean? 30, there's a lot
So
of
our
education.
clinics, yeah, our clinics on average currently, we're running a little above 50% on our clinical pregnancy rates. We want to get that number up even a little higher. And we take a really data-driven approach to what we're doing. It's interesting. One of the other things I'd be remiss if I didn't mention is you look at different clinics and it's really hard to get apples to apples comparison about anything, whether it's success rates, pricing, because there's a lack of transparency. So a clinic may tout that they have 80% clinical success rates. And then you start scratching under the surface and you're like, how many patients did you exclude from treatment to get to that number?
Oh.
Right? The World Health Organization declared family building a fundamental human right. We're off the mark in providing meaningful access to this care, but we're also off the mark in that providers can make who they're treating so narrow so as to drive that clinical pregnancy rate up. Pricing is another area where it's really hard to compare two clinics because you don't know what's included in their pricing. So when we say we charge X for a retrieval, that includes all the lab work. That's very uncommon in the IVF world to include everything in a number. Usually you see a price and that's for the medical side of it. And then the lab side of it is totally separate. And then those two numbers combined give you your total price. Is that transparent? I don't know. Is it the way it's always been done? Yep. Do I think it's hard for the consumer? Because as medical patients, we still have to think of them as consumers, right? Who they deserve that transparency and they deserve to understand it. So a big part of why we're structured the way we are and why we structured pricing the way we did and why we give aggregate clinical pregnancy numbers. We don't say, okay, if you're 25 to 32, our clinical success rate is X. This is total number. We want to be really transparent with information.
I love that as a consumer in the so like I need a foot surgery, right? So I call and I say, how much is the surgery? And the doctor's office says 3,000, whatever it is, $3,000. Okay. Yeah. But then there's lab, there's radiology, there's
anesthesia,
there's like a bazillion hidden fees. And it's so frustrating because, okay, your fee is $3,000. I'm just going to double that because you get all these bills from all these departments that you didn't even know were involved. And it's really discouraging. Now, if you have insurance that covers 80+%, it's still a surprise, but less hurtful. But when it's a procedure that you're paying out of pocket, it's such a slap in the face, right? It's so frustrating. And I really appreciate that you do that because that is so disheartening. The other thing you talked about is the language of the contracts. And I deal with women with miscarriage all the time. And it's the same thing. I'm like, you need to get your medical records because it's like putting together a puzzle of what happened in the OR or what happened with the medical waste, which is the fetal tissue under 20 weeks. Like we're putting together this puzzle to help you have closure in your grief. And it is not intentional. Medical terminology, insurance terminology, contract terminology does not take into consideration the emotions of the person. It is very cut and dry. And so I think all you can do in that situation is the same thing that I do. It's not going to sound pretty. You're going to read it. It's going to hurt all over again. That is not intentional. Would I like to change it? Yes. Is this the hill I'll die on? No, because the chances of me changing all of that terminology to make it feel better when you read it, that is not a battle I'm going to win. And that's really not where the energy needs to be focused either. That's not going to help your grief necessarily. It doesn't, yeah, maybe a little
Yeah.
bit. It'll feel better when you read it, but really, like, that is not where we can focus. And it's hard not to get tunnel vision to focus on something like that. Like, I'm sorry, this contract sucks and doesn't have inclusive language that makes you feel good. That's really not the point, though, right? So that's a hard conversation to have, though.
It is. And it's interesting. You use the word intention, and that word, I think it matters a lot, especially when we're building something new, right? What is
Yes.
your intention? What are you saying you're doing in the world, and how is that reflected in what you're actually doing? Right. And it matters on a bunch of different fronts, right? So if we're going out and we're saying, okay, we want to be accessible to previously underserved communities, whether those are BIPOC communities throughout, major
Mhm.
urban areas that have been historically neglected with
Right.
not, having access to clinics, or whether we're looking at just geographic access or socio, economic
Yeah.
access to, we have to be intentional about that. We have to make choices that reflect that intention, and it goes through everything. We try to really thread it through everything we do, in the way that we write our consents, in the way that we talk to patients, just from the outset. We don't assume people are married. We don't assume if they have a partner. We don't assume anything. And I think, when you're talking about it's not the hill you're going to die on, it's, I think, totally right. And it looks like an insurmountable task, but also, candidly, we have tools out there now. Let's even just look at Chat GPT, right? Could clinics throw all of their consents into Chat GPT and say, can you please remove gendered heteronormative language from this? And it would do it like that.
Mhm.
And then you could review it and put it back out there. And so while it's not impossible, it just takes intention, in my opinion, and
Right.
effort. And, it's one of those things you can choose not to as a medical provider, because you don't have to. Nobody's going to make you. But why would you do that? Why would you, not adapt to the environment that we're in, where people want to read a consent and not have it be assumed that they're heterosexual and married, right? Like, that's weird, and it makes you, let's be honest, there's a big thing that we don't talk about enough, and that's shame. People, even if they feel good about the choice they're making to go through this process, by themselves, to be shamed along the way. And back to that intentionality, I choose to believe none of it's intentional.
Yeah.
But there are things that we as human beings can do in our company here at Mate, or, to make an example and say, like, this is what we did. Other people can do whatever they want, but we felt like this was important, so we did it.
You have the ability in your company to use to change the language and have contracts that are different. I think I want to make clear, it's not the hill I'll die on, because it's the hospital and insurance language. And that's not changing a contract in my business. That's a massive undertaking. And do I want to?
It's bureaucracy. It's like fighting the federal government to get,
Yeah. So
but one of the things, the language, like even in insurance policies, there are lawsuits out there that exist. There's a lesbian couple that sued Aetna Insurance because they were excluded from coverage because the policy language as written states you have to have tried naturally for 12 months to qualify for coverage under your insurance policy. Well, they were automatically excluded from that coverage. So because of the language in that policy. And so it's one of the things, gosh, can you imagine? You're like excited, you've gone through your insurance policy and you're like, wow, we're going to do this. And it's covered by our insurance, only to be slapped with no, because you haven't tried naturally.
Maybe they did. It just didn't work. Sorry.
Yeah. Define try naturally.
I mean,
I love that. Define try naturally.
We have been trying for 3 years and nothing we have done has worked. I mean, like, I don't have a uterus.
That's the line of the day. I love that.
We can clip that out, I think that for me, I want to work with a person's grief through miscarriage, fatal diagnosis, and stillbirth. And is it important to ask and try to get insurance companies and hospitals to change their language? Yes. Is it where I'm going to put my effort? No, because when you have a
Yeah.
miscarriage and you get your insurance paperwork, it says that you had an abortion. For a woman who was pregnant and wanted that pregnancy and lost it against her will, you don't want to see the word abortion. It's very
No,
triggering.
you do not.
Do I want to change that? Yes. Is it where I'm going to focus my energy? Is it the hill I'm going to die on? No. Am I thankful for people who are like, wait a minute, I don't like that, and I am going to go after that? Yes. I mean, I think that there should be changes. Would I get on the bandwagon with someone else? Yes, I would. But it's not something that, like, I am not going to fight that battle. That's not my battle.
Yeah.
There's
I think a
there.
big part of that intentionality behind what we're doing is some of what we're talking about, is hedging, right? So by
Yeah.
laying a foundation that's intentional, do I think insurance companies are going to suddenly start mandating coverage for this with all inclusive language next year? No,
No.
I
Right.
don't. Do
I
I
want
think that we can lay the groundwork to like hedge for hopeful future changes?
yeah.
Absolutely.
And can you be an
Absolutely. And
example of changing the language within your business? Yes.
yeah,
Like, you can be an example in what that looks like. Yes. I want to switch
exactly.
gears a little bit because you're the CEO and we've talked a lot about that. And I want to end there. I want to end with the Mate Infertility, because you guys are doing a lot and there's a lot of clinics now. But I want to talk about your journey in becoming the CEO. Can we spend some time in that? Because that's a pretty,
Yeah.
it's an amazing feat to be the CEO of this massive company that's really groundbreaking and changing people's lives. Even if it's a small amount of 3 million, it's still like making a difference to that one at a time, right? So
That's
take
right.
me through your journey in Traci and how you got to be the CEO.
So I was born, no, I'm just kidding.
No, yeah, we could do that.
Yeah. It's interesting, and I have to be really candid. Being a CEO wasn't on my career path trajectory. It's not something that I aspired to. Um, and it's been very interesting. I have to say, it was one of the first things in quite some time professionally that gave me enough pause, and made me nervous, because of the gravitas of what we're doing here, but also the gravitas of being a CEO. I think people underestimate the level of fiduciary responsibility you have across so many different areas. I firmly believe that if you're not a little bit scared to be the CEO, it's maybe not a good fit, just because of the level of responsibility you have. But I started out my career in Boston in the investment world, not in the
Okay.
flash front side of
Okay.
investments. I graduated from college. I tested into a program at an investment bank to become a custody fund accountant. They put you through SEC training.
Okay.
And so I did fund accounting for a couple of years, and then I went into back and middle office operations with a bank that was acquired by State Street. Then I went on to a boutique investment firm, and I did more analytics and controller type work. So all operational. And then I was a consultant for about 11 years. And what I would do is I would work with small and medium businesses to help them do operational assessments to put in solutions that would help their business be more successful, give them more insight into how things were really going, etc. But I also had a niche where I would get hired to either close down companies or, shut down a portion of their business, relocate it, various activities like that. And there are three main reasons why I came on board with Mate. Number one, LGBTQ community member. We know the importance of assisted reproductive technology for our community. It's something that we're aware of earlier than perhaps a heterosexual person who's kind of under the assumption everything's just going to work out on that front. LGBTQ individuals, families are aware of the need for third-party reproductive access. Also, I grew up in the rural South, so meaningful access to care is important to me. When we look at concentration of high quality care, it's not equally distributed throughout the United States. And, I had some situations when I was a kid where my dad had a brain tumor, had to travel great distance to actually get good care for that tumor. And so geographic access matters. And then the business model, it's elegant at Mate. It's creating a true solution that's holistic and can provide a lot of upside potential for all parties involved, from the patient to the doctors that we partner with, to the overall fertility community, in sort of standardizing some things that have historically not really been looked at in a meaningful way. So our model really functions in a way that wraps around the patient. It provides more geographic access. It provides and enables OB-GYNs to participate in this part of reproductive care that's historically been extracted from their practices, which kind of doesn't make sense when you look at it. And then also there's kind of a lack of standardization across the fertility industry. Yeah, sure, there's like bits and bobs, CDC, SART, etc., ASRM that provides wonderful guidelines. But the way that we look at it is, how can we standardize the delivery of care over multiple parties in a meaningful way with optimal outcomes that's also more affordable and more geographically accessible to patients. So, it's a really amazing mission. And I think many of us, including myself, I'll only speak for myself, reach a point in our careers and our lives where it's like, I could do what I'm good at anywhere. I might as well do it somewhere where my skill set is going to create some meaningful change in the world.
I love that you started finance. I did not see that coming. And not at all. Like, I was a business
It was the
major,
gritty side. It was the gritty back office operations, figuring out logistics of how to, manage bulk order trades and stuff like that. It was the unsexy side of investment world.
That's okay. That's okay. And also because I've gone through infertility, and you just said you're making advancements. So my oldest daughter that I had biologically is turning 31 in April, and we're recording this at the end of January. And she has this similar fertility issues that I had, and has decided to not have children and not go through infertility. The interesting, sad thing is that I would have thought, okay, I went through my infertility journey 32 years ago, and nothing has changed in what she did. Like, her plan of attack I was like, I was shocked because it was exactly the same. So my thought going through it 32 years ago, and, I gave birth to 4 girls. 2 of them probably will not have children. One of them has had kids. One of them looks like she'll be able to have kids. Just based by cycles and stuff like that. But I thought, oh my gosh, I had these girls genetically, they're already predisposed to having issues with their fertility genetically, because it's something that runs in my family. And like, I had a hysterectomy at 33. So I had these little girls when they were little thinking, oh no, I'm so sorry. Like, before I even knew, I'm already, because you don't want a woman to have to go through that. But my hope was
you would have hoped over 32 years that something would have changed.
Nothing has changed. Zero.
So people, one of the things that I find fascinating, and I'm not a doctor. We have wonderful doctors that work for us. And, what we try to do is take an approach that's agnostically driven by information, data, and that serves, the most people the best, right? So just as an example, one of the way that we approach dosing, medications, because that's one of the things, the price can vary wildly. And we take an approach that mimicking natural biology, Not only is there clinical data that's as closely as you can, there's data to suggest that higher outcomes, it's also more affordable for the patient, and it also is way, nothing's easy on the body during this process, but it's easier on the body, right? And then you look at the way that like different doctors do their dosing. You go to 10 different doctors, they're all doing it a different way. And some of them who started doing this in the 80s are still doing dosing the same way that they were in the 80s, which makes, to me, it doesn't make a ton of sense. Just agnostically, I can say, gosh, a lot has changed. There's a lot more information out there. Like, and so what we look at it is our responsibility. And that's why we don't just have one REI that works with us. We have a bunch of REIs that work with us, and they're all brilliant at what they do, and they all bring a unique perspective. We take that oncological care approach where it's like, let's get all of these REs in the room. Let's get our PhD embryologists in the room, and let's do the best path that makes the most sense based on the data that's out there. And, you know, we are trying to take a standardized approach. I think there's also, you know, historically, it was a bit of a, oh, well, this doctor has really good outcomes. What's he doing over there? And, you know, this, like, let's make it like a secret potion of how we're dosing, because, but, you know, we don't want to do that. We want to take a really scientific approach to it, a really data-driven approach, and standardize it and measure the outcomes against those standards and make adjustments as needed, you know, take that approach to what we're doing. And, you know, you said a lot hasn't changed, and you're totally right. I was just reading about a company yesterday. You know, when you look at the embryology lab as an example, you know, you still have a person in that lab responsible for every little component of what goes on to make sure that everything happens right. And, you know, I use the analogy, and this is perhaps going to sound weird to some, but, you know, again, my consulting experience is that a good solution is a good solution is a good solution. It doesn't matter what industry it's in, right? So think about a dry cleaner, and this sounds like a very broad jump, but you go to the dry cleaner, you hand your articles over to a person, they code them into the system, they put them there, they go through the process, they come back out, that person hands you the thing, you hand them a ticket, they hand you the thing. Why are we so far behind in embryology labs, which is way more important than articles of clothing, on being able to codify a process in a meaningful way so that it's standardized, you know? And I'm not saying, you know, of course, I think humans are really important in this process to oversee and do the things that need to be done. But like, how come there has been such a lack of innovation to your point, you know? They got it figured out, the dry cleaner, how to do this. But you know, we haven't figured it out here.
I totally get it. I mean, it's a great analogy. A long time ago, I worked in dental offices, and in a seminar, they were saying the same thing, like, why haven't we done this? And they called auto mechanics. And it was a recording, like, hey, how much does it cost for me to get this, and this? Like, why can't people call the dental office and have the same process? You can do it for your car. You can't, but a person can't call a medical office. It's the same thing in my surgery example, right? How much does it cost? Like, and nobody can actually give me that answer, because there's 7 different people I'd have to call, and they'd all have to give me an accurate cost, and none of them can do that. The surgeon can give me his.
Well, and if you call on 2 different days, you might get 2 different answers.
Yeah. So I like the dry cleaner, just like when I was in a medical field, they gave an auto mechanic example. It's the same thing. Like, why can't we do better at this stuff?
Well, and I think a lot of it, like, and I don't say any of this in a critical way, but it comes from sort of complacency. You know, you don't have to innovate because you're making a ton of money doing what you're doing. And like, what's the point? Right. So if nothing's compelling you to move forward, why would you? It's easier to stay in your green pasture with the sun shining on your back. Right. But we come to inflection points, and I think we've seen it with COVID, where it created enough friction that things started to change, right? And that's kind of the goal here, is like, we want to create enough friction, because when we look at the way that it's been going and the way that the delta year over year between those who need care and those who are receiving it, it's just getting wider. So if we don't do something that can hopefully make some meaningful, put some progress in place, nothing will ever change.
I agree. I'd like to end on a happy note because we could just keep talking, but I do want to wrap this up because I know you guys are making a difference, but I've loved I love stats. I just geek out on this stuff. And you are making a difference because going from 33% to 50% is massive, massive in success rate. So tell me about how many clinics there are now, because it started with that one clinic and it started helping with that one person, and it started with increasing the success I can speak today, success percentage. And now where are you at with clinics? And let's end on a happy note.
Yeah. So, and thank you. I think, we have 3 clinics open and running. We have 2 more coming online, under contract, and then hopefully we have a very broad pipeline of future scheduled openings. What we've really been focusing on for the past year and a half is standardizing everything so that we make it easy for the providers we partner with to get up and running smoothly, quickly, and successfully. So we have standardized the process almost like a franchise, if you want to think of it like that. So you know what you're getting. You're getting education, you're getting project management, then you're getting all of the SOPs, you're getting all of the materials you need to successfully run this operation. And then you get our blended care. So we have some of the team will sit remotely, and then you have your physical office people. So, our goal is really to double clinic count year over year for the next several years. And that's, I think, could be conservative, given that we are starting to have conversations with aggregators and hospital systems, which is very exciting. It provides a next level of care in their ecosystem. Continuity of care is a huge factor in women's health. This facilitates that, but it also, it does add revenue to these practices. So, it's along the lines of really focusing on growth that's intentional, that's repeatable, so that clinic A, B, and C are all getting the exact same thing. We focus a lot on our tech stack to make sure that it's easy for everybody to use, including the patient, the provider, and then all of our reporting, et cetera. So, we're excited. We're on track to double our clinic count year over year, 2022 to 2023. And then we'll hope to do the same again in 24 and 25.
Traci, thank you so much for being on and sharing this information. It was really invaluable, and I appreciate you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Jen. It was awesome chatting with you. I really appreciate what you're doing as well.